Grace and peace to you from God the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. My name is Daniel, and in this video we're going to be talking about um, who went where and when during the day of Resurrection Sunday. We're going to be looking at all four Gospels, verse by verse, and our objective is going to be to get an understanding of what was going on that morning, because some of the accounts seem to differ if you're just reading it very casually, and that's not what we're going to do here. What we're going to do is we're going to go verse by verse, and we're going to try to answer three questions. We're going to see who was there, who was going to the tomb of Jesus, and we're going to see what time were they going, and then the third objective is going to be to harmonize all of this, make it all make sense. Thank you for joining me, and let's get started. Okay. The fancy name for this video series is the Chronology of Post-Resurrection Events, and the title of this video is The Women Came to the Tomb. The Women Came to the Tomb is one of the things we're going to be focusing on, this word came, because the three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they say the women came to the tomb, or they came to see the tomb, but John says they went. So we're going to look at some of that as well. Let's start things off on Matthew, right? Okay. All right, this is fantastic. I'm using some new software for these videos. I'm very excited. There was a little bit of a learning curve, but here we are. Let's get started here in Matthew 28. Matthew 28, verse 1. Starting at verse 1, it says, "Now after the Sabbath, as the first day of the week began to dawn, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary came to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat on it. His countenance was like lightning, his clothing as white as snow, and the guards shook for fear of him and became like dead men." What do we have here? Matthew's telling us that there's two ladies. We've got Mary Magdalene, who appears in all four accounts. Mary Magdalene is in all four accounts. And the other Mary, right? The other Mary. What are they doing? They're going to the tomb. When is it? The day after the Sabbath. Sabbath was celebrated on Saturday, or is celebrated on Saturday. That's where we get the name Saturday, from the Sabbath day. And we have that these two ladies are on their way. It's the first day of the week when the day began to dawn. Okay, so we've got a time, a location, or at least a destination, and who's there. And then we've got some other key things here. The angel comes down. There's an earthquake. The angel is the one that rolls away the stone. And we're told that the guards that were placed there, they shook for fear of him and became like dead men. We're going to talk about the guards in later videos. We're going to talk about the angels in later videos. But right now, it's important to see Matthew's telling us two ladies were on the way to the tomb. Let's go to Mark. What does Mark have to say? Mark says, "Now, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they said among themselves, 'Who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us?' But when they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large." Mark has given us a few more details than Matthew. Matthew had the stuff about the earthquake and the angels. Matthew's telling us what the ladies are thinking on the way. First, let's look at who's going. We've got Mary Magdalene again. And Mark tells us that the mother of James is the other Mary, right? Or at least one of the other Mary. Mary was a very popular name back then, as it is today. Mary, the mother of James, and Salome. And it's telling us that they bought spices that they might come and anoint him. Okay, now we've got them buying spices. Again, we're told it's very early in the morning, and Mark tells us that the sun had risen. They came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And then in verse 3, he's telling us that they were talking amongst themselves and they were wondering who's going to roll away the stone. I guess between them three, at least according to Mark, they didn't feel that they were capable of moving the stone, right? So along the way, what we're seeing is that in verse 2, we're already there, right? Verse 1 is telling us something. These ladies bought spices when the Sabbath was passed, but it's also Sunday morning that day, right? So we've got these three ladies buying the spices, and then we've got them walking to the tomb of Jesus. And along the way, well, verse 2 tells us that they got there, but verse 3 tells us that along the way they were thinking something. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a timeline. We're trying to figure out what happened and when did it happen. Okay? And then verse 4 tells us that their concern was for naught, right? Because they get there, and Mark says that they looked up. Now, did they look up? No, they were probably focused on the path. They're walking to there, and the tomb is off in the distance. They look up, right? Farther down along the path, and they see the stone's been rolled away. Thank you, Mark. Now let's see what Luke has to say. We have to start on the day that Christ was crucified to understand who it is that was there in Luke's account. So we'll start in Luke 23, verse 55. It says, "The women had come to him from Galilee, and the women who had come with him from Galilee followed after, and they observed the tomb and how his body was laid." Of course, we're talking about Jesus. We're given some key details here, right? We're being told that there is a group of women, the women, who had followed him from Galilee. Jerusalem is on, if we're looking at a map, it's south of Galilee. It's a distance that they have to walk, and we're told that certain women had followed Jesus there. They didn't know he was going to be crucified. Jesus was just out, doing his ministry thing. Jesus knew, and he heads towards Jerusalem when his time has come, when he knows his time has come. And there's a group following him. There's the disciples, but the men, but there's also women. There's women who follow Jesus. And there's a group of women, a particular group of women from Galilee. They follow him. And they're there with him the whole time. We read about the disciples. We read about the men fleeing, running away, running for their lives, denying Jesus, hiding. The women didn't do that. The women stuck by him the whole way. And they've seen Jesus get crucified. They've seen him die. And they're watching Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus bringing his body down, caring for the body, and placing it in the tomb. We're told that they observed the tomb and how his body was laid. They are not handling the body of Jesus. That's very important. It's something that's going to come up in later videos. And we get that from this verse, that they're observing, they're seeing. So they know where Jesus is. That's how they know where the tomb is. And then they formulate this plan. Verse 56, "Then they returned and prepared spices and fragrant oils, and they rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment." Very important. We're told that very day, after they see Jesus being entombed, that they go and they prepare spices and fragrant oils. But Mark tells us that after the Sabbath, they bought some spices and fragrant oils. Okay, so we need to account for those two things. Now in Luke 24, starting at verse 1, we read, "Now on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they came." They, who's they? The women who came from Galilee. That's what we had to read verse 55 in chapter 23 of Luke. They came, okay, now on the first day of the week, very early in the morning, they and certain other women with them came to the tomb, bringing spices which they had prepared. But they found a stone rolled away from the tomb. We're starting to get a clearer picture, or at least a bigger picture. It's a group of women. And, Mark says it was two. Mark says it was three. Matthew says it was two. Luke is telling us there's a bigger group. Within that bigger group, we see the two, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary, in the account of Matthew. And in that group, we also see, again, Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, and Salome. And further ahead in Luke, we read that there's a few more women. That's why Luke is using the term women and not just naming names or saying a woman or the woman. Because what's going on is a group of ladies, a group of women are following Jesus in his ministry, and they see where his body is laid, they see the tomb, and they decide that day, we're going to care for the body of our Lord Jesus Christ. We're going to give him a decent burial, something that you would give to anybody, right? You don't just toss them in a hole. No, there's preparations, there's things that need to be done, and in their society, in their culture, they had their own traditions or their own customs of handling the deceased. The person who had died. I'm not saying Jesus had a disease. Yeah, he was dead. The diseased. It's not coming out right, but you guys know what I'm talking about. So they had their customs, they had their traditions, and they were going to honor the body of our Lord. And they made this plan on Friday. They get together, and that Friday before the Sabbath, they go and they get all the stuff ready. But it's obvious that some stuff was missing, right? Because Mark tells us that after the Sabbath, they went and they bought some stuff. Now, in U.S. culture or Western culture, we're accustomed to marking the beginning and the end of the day by the rising and the setting of the sun, or at least by when you go to sleep and when you wake up. In the Jewish tradition, or the customs or the law of this time, according to the Mosaic law, the day began and ended at around 6 p.m., right? So for them to honor the Sabbath, that means that Friday evening, let's just say 6 o'clock, but it was something along the lines of when the first 3 stars were seen in the night sky, something like that. Well, but it was in the evening. It wasn't, let's go to bed and the day's over. No, let's say it started about 6 and they didn't go to bed till 11, right? There's a good chunk of time there before, after the Sabbath has commenced. My point is that on Friday, they begin the honoring of the Sabbath, but it ends on Saturday around the same time. And we have to remember that at this time, it's the time of the Passover. That's why the Pharisees or the religious leaders wanted to bring down the body of Jesus. They didn't want it still up there at the beginning of the Passover. They were preparing for the Passover, and this means that Jerusalem at that time was full of people. Passover was one of the religious festivals that required that the people travel to Jerusalem. So there's a bunch of people there, right? And it's reasonable to imagine that either the stores were open very early on Sunday morning, or they were open late Saturday night, because people are preparing for the Passover. They're buying whatever they need. It's just a lot of hustle, a lot of bustle, a lot of stuff's going on. So when we're told in Mark that they bought spices the day after the Passover, that doesn't necessarily mean that they went to the store at 4 or 5 in the morning on Sunday. It could very well mean that they were at the store, 7, 8 o'clock in the evening on Saturday itself. So that's how we can understand the buying and the preparing. They're preparing here, according to Luke, Friday, and Mark tells us that after the Sabbath, they went to the store and bought some more spices and fragrant oils. And that's how we make sense of it. It could have been in the evening on the Saturday, the Sabbath was over, or it could have been very possible, the stores are open bright and early on Sunday. Why? Because there's so much going on. There's so many people buying. If you're a store owner, if you're selling something, a shop owner, you want to make sure you have the opportunity to sell as much as you can, because this is a very special day. All right, what else do we have here? I believe that's all we're going to get right now from Luke. Let's see what John has to say. All right, according to John, chapter 20, starting at verse 1, we read, "Now the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb." Verse 2 says, "Then she ran." Then she ran. So according to John, it's Mary Magdalene who goes and sees that the stone's rolled away. And then she runs. But if we read the text carefully, what makes her run? It's the sight of the open tomb. And we read in Luke that the women don't just show up, oh, look, it's open. That they look up. They look up, and off in the distance or up on the side of the hill where Jesus is buried, they look up and they see the stone's been rolled away. So now we got to harmonize that. We got to put all that together. What's going on? Let's address the issue of how many women, because John is saying 1, Mark is saying 2, Matthew's saying 3, Luke is saying it's a whole bunch of them. But guess what none of them are saying? None of them are saying it was only 1. It was exactly 3. It was no more and no less than 2. None of the Gospels say that. Why? Because none of that is true. What is true is it was a group. But when we're talking to John, John's focused on Mary Magdalene. So if you go and ask John, or John, when he sat down to write his account of everything, the Gospel of John, he's focused on Mary. Why is he focused on Mary? Well, we're going to read here, and if you remember, Mary's the one that comes to him and tells him, the body's gone, the stone's rolled away, somebody took Jesus. After, that's exactly what we read in the rest of verse 2 here. We're not doing that today because it's not part of this video. But of course, if you ask John, hey, John, what happened? They say, oh, well, Mary came and she told us the body was gone. And, it was early in the morning. He's given us Mary's account. He's not focused on the other women. It's not that the other women weren't there. It's that from John's point of view, or at least what John wants us to focus on, is Mary. So that makes sense. It's the same thing for the other gospel writers, Matthew and Mark. The Bible doesn't tell me this, but it's possible that they heard from Mary and the other Mary, and maybe Mark heard from Mary, Salome, and the other Mary. They're focusing in on certain people that make up this larger group that Luke is talking about. Luke is kind of a detective, right? He says that he talked to everybody and he got this account and he just wanted to be as thorough as possible. So when Luke is writing, Luke isn't focusing on any 1 or 2 of the women. Luke talked to everybody, did his investigation, and he concluded there was a bunch of women from Galilee, and then there was a bunch of other women, and they were all on the way to the tomb. They were going to go, with the spices and the oil and all that. If there's 5 women, then there's also 1. Then there's also 2. Right? There's nothing that says there was only a certain number. So that's the easy part. Now the tricky part, because John right now, he just told us here, we just read that it was still dark. But Mark says in verse 2, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. So now we got to piece all that together. The Bible's not lying. The Bible's not making any mistakes. It's just a matter of us understanding what's going on. This is not a static moment. The Bible isn't describing a picture or a painting. We can Google famous artworks of, the women at the tomb, and you'll get all kinds of depictions. And you can describe that, oh, this lady's here, this lady's there, the sun is out, the stars are out, whatever it is. But that's not what's happening here. The Gospels are giving us a detailed account of a passing of time. They're telling us, without saying it was this time, it was that time, or 3 hours or 2 hours, but they are telling us what's going on. Mark begins the story by telling us that they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. That's their arrival. They get to the tomb when the sun had risen, but Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early while it was still dark. What are we to understand? We're to understand that Friday, or the day Jesus Christ got crucified, they make a plan. They follow, they see, okay, he's there. That's where they laid him. And they make a plan. We're going to minister to the body. We're going to do our traditions and our customs. We're going to do what is right and adequate. They don't handle the body of Jesus or his blood. How do we know that? Because Luke tells us that in verse 56 of Luke 23, that they rested on the Sabbath. They participated on the Sabbath according to the commandment. If they, the women, had helped move the body and cleaned up blood and did something, right, to handle a dead body, would disqualify them from participating in the Sabbath according to the commandment. They were trying to maintain ritually pure. That is why Luke gives us this weird detail, right? You can read past it so easily, and I'm sure many of us have. But they didn't handle the body because they were trying to remain clean or ceremonially clean. Not that they couldn't go wash their hands. No, there were laws that God had set up through Moses that said you can't handle a dead body. There has to be a purification ritual. There has to be some time that goes by before you participate in the things of God. And that tells us a lot about Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, right? It was an important religious holiday, the Passover, and they were going to miss it. They couldn't participate. They had to abstain. They had to move away from everyone. And their love for Jesus motivated them to do this. They didn't care. They loved Jesus. They recognized who he was. And, they asked Pilate, can we bury the body? And they handle the body, and that makes them ceremonially unclean. These religious leaders forego all that. And there's a beautiful thing to see that, right? When Jesus comes in, that's the end of religion. They didn't care about their religion at the time. They cared about Jesus. They loved Jesus. And it was a big sacrifice for them. But the other side of that coin is it was a big sacrifice for the women. Jesus' mom is there. I can't imagine having one of my kids' dead body somewhere and I'm not. You would have to do something to get me to let go. You would have to knock me out, drug me, drag me away. You couldn't keep me away. The women had this love. They're following Jesus from all over the place, right? They don't care if the soldiers do anything to them at all. They put their life at risk and they never abandon Jesus. So the restraint that these women show, that they don't go and handle the dead body, that's a love for God, who is also Jesus, right? It's just a beautiful picture that we're seeing, the men abandoning this religious requirement because of love of the love that they have for Jesus, and the women abandoning their need, their desire to go and do something. But they see that the guys are doing it too. I'm sure that helps. If nobody else was doing it, I guarantee you the women would have been there. But they restrained themselves. Why? Because God had commanded it so. All right, so let's do a recap. What do we have? We have that it was a group of women. One author is focusing on this group. One author is focusing on another group. One author is just focusing on Mary. So there's no error there. The Bible isn't lying. And these are the kind of things that people bring up and they say, aha, look, here it says 1 and here it says 3. See, you can't trust the Bible. And then what do we say, right? If we haven't taken the time to analyze this verse by verse and put it together, harmonize it, then we don't know what to say. We just sit there, we scratch our heads, right? But now we see, it was a group. But this author's focusing on one and this author's focusing on the other. Easy. Another point of contention is, oh, look, it says that they prepared the spices, and then here it says that they went and they bought them. We just talked about that. They had some at home. They prepared what they had. They honored the Sabbath. When the Sabbath was over, they bought some more. They bought what they needed. And then the last one is the time. It says here it's daytime. It says here it's nighttime. We just talked about that. They set out. When they set out, it's still dark. And by the time they get there, it's night. It's daytime. So we're seeing a passage of time. Are these contradictions? Are these errors? Certainly not. There are no errors in the Bible. And praise be to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, that we were able to take some time and to analyze this and give it the time that it really deserves. So this is just the beginning. We've got a long way to go, and the rest of the videos are going to be just like this. I hope you can continue to follow along and do the like and the subscribe. In the comment section, I'm also going to include a little research that I did with these words, came and went. The synoptics say the women came to the tomb, but John says that they went, and that helps support what I'm saying about the passage of time. When John says that Mary went, he's talking about the beginning, the initiating of her day, the start of her day. And then the other Gospels, when they say came, they're using the Greek word for, well, you'll see in the research paper. What I do is I look into the Greek, I get some definitions, and it helps explain that, because I want to back up what I'm saying. I'm not just making this stuff up. So I'm going to throw that in the description. I hope I remember. Give me some time. All right, I guess that's all. Like and subscribe. Thank you very much. And let's see, how do I stop recording? There we go. It's this new